Hey everyone! Today we're taking a close look at a new blueprint that could really shape the future of Yutan, Nebraska. The city is in the middle of a major overhaul of its zoning code. You know, the rulebook that says what can be built and where. So let's get right into it. Now this is about way more than just lines on a map. This stuff could affect your property, your neighborhood, and what your community looks and feels like for years. So whether you own a home, run a business, or even rent, these changes are going to be important. So what's actually on the table? We've broken this down into 4 main parts to make it easy to follow. First, we'll look at the new rulebook itself. Then we'll see how Yutan's map is getting redrawn. After that, we'll get personal with changes that could land right on your doorstep. And finally, we'll touch on some new, very specific regulations.
All right, let's start with the basics, the administrative side of things. How the city's powers are changing when it comes to interpreting and enforcing these rules.
Right off the bat, we see a really big shift in approach. The old code is super rigid. If something isn't on the list, you can't do it. Simple as that. The new proposal, though, adds some common sense and flexibility. It gives the zoning administrator the power to say, this new idea isn't on the list, but it's a lot like this other thing that is allowed, so it's okay. It's basically moving from a no unless we say yes system to something a lot more practical.
The whole process for getting a building permit is getting a tune-up too. The new draft makes it crystal clear. You can't even get a building permit until the zoning administrator gives you what's called zoning approval. This makes sure your project fits the new code before anything else happens. It's a mandatory first step now, which should actually simplify things in the long run.
Now let's talk penalties. If you violate a zoning rule, the fine is $100. Okay, on the surface, that doesn't seem like much, right? But don't let that number fool you, because a tiny detail in the new proposal changes, well, everything.
And here it is. This is how the new code gets some real teeth. The proposal allows that $100 fine to be charged every single day a violation isn't fixed. Suddenly, a minor issue that someone might ignore could turn into a massive fine really quickly. The big takeaway here? Enforcement is about to get a whole lot more serious.
Okay, so with some stronger rules in place, let's look at the map itself. We're moving from the how to the where, and looking at how Yutan's neighborhoods and business areas are getting a makeover.
First, just a quick look at some name changes. The old codes like R1 and B2 are being swapped out for names that actually make sense. R1 and R2 will become R West and R East, to reflect the different vibes of the old town versus the eastern part of town. And the main business areas are being combined into BCBD. It's a simple tweak, but it makes the map way easier to read.
Now this is a big one, probably one of the most significant changes in the entire draft. The Sunset Acres subdivision, which is currently a residential zone, could be completely reclassified as Transitional Agriculture, or TA. And trust me, this is way more than just a name change. It could fundamentally change what people can do with their property out there.
So let's actually break down what this means. If you live in Sunset Acres, your maximum lot coverage, how much of your land you can build on, more than doubles, jumping from 20% all the way up to 45%. That is a huge increase in flexibility. The rules for sheds, garages, and other accessory buildings also get a lot more relaxed. Those strict size limits and the 25-foot height cap, they're gone, replaced with a much more generous 35-foot height limit and no specific caps on size. And this is a big one. Accessory dwelling units, think guest houses or in-law suites, would now be explicitly allowed, which they are not right now.
Okay, let's bring the focus in even closer to home. This next bit is all about changes that could directly affect how you use your own property day in and day out. We're talking home businesses, backyard fences, the works.
All right, if you run a business out of your house, you'll definitely want to pay attention to this. Right now, the rules say you can use up to half of your home's floor area for your business. The new draft proposes slashing that all the way down to just 15%. That would seriously limit the size of a home-based business. Now, it's worth noting that the city has indicated they're open to feedback on this particular number.
Fence rules are getting a complete makeover, and honestly, it seems to be for the better. The old system was kind of a pain. You needed a permit, you couldn't have a fence in your front yard, and there was a hard height cap. The new proposal, it gets rid of the permit requirement completely, and instead of strict limits, it just offers simple guidelines. Oh, and it also says no more barbed wire on residential lots. This is a clear move toward less red tape and more freedom for homeowners.
So we mentioned these earlier, but the new code officially introduces something called accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. These are basically smaller, separate living spaces on the same property as a main house. Now, there are some key conditions. The property owner has to live on site, either in the main house or the ADU. The ADU has to be smaller than the main house, have its own entrance, and can't have more than 2 bedrooms. This is a pretty big deal because it could open up a lot of new housing options right inside existing neighborhoods.
Okay, last section. Let's look at how the new code is trying to get ahead of some very specific and very modern land use questions, everything from cannabis businesses to cell phone towers.
For the very first time, Yutan's code is spelling out specific rules for adult-oriented and cannabis-related businesses, and it's all about location, location, location. These types of businesses would only be allowed in certain commercial or industrial zones. Plus, they have to follow strict buffer rules, staying 500 feet away from each other and a full 1,000 feet away from places like schools, parks, and churches.
The draft also wades into another huge piece of modern life: wireless towers. And on this one, it seems the city is still weighing its options and is really looking for what the community thinks.
So there are 2 very different paths Yutan could take here. Option 1 is basically to keep things as they are, which allows smaller towers in residential neighborhoods. Option 2 is brand new and much more restrictive. It would completely ban new towers from residential areas, pushing them out to agricultural or commercial districts instead. This decision is a real balancing act between future cell coverage and the look and feel of Yutan's neighborhoods.
So there you have it, a new rulebook that's more flexible in some ways and a lot stricter in others. It's a blueprint that gives more freedom to some landowners, creates new housing possibilities, and draws clear lines for modern businesses. It really all comes down to this one question: what kind of community will these new rules help build? That's something for the entire town to think about. Thanks for tuning in.